All right, let's get to our top right fielders of all time. I love looking at depth charts, whether it's in football, baseball. I love the image of the field with the depth chart and the guys under them. So I thought, why not do an all-time Phillies depth chart as we lead up to the regular season here? So we're going to do it like we did our top 5 positional players in baseball. We'll go right field across, third base across, up to the catcher and the starting pitcher and bullpen. And talk about the all-time Phillies depth chart. Now, we agreed to this as a team. We brought John Foley into the mix. We all voted on this. So let's start with number 3, all-time in the Phillies depth chart. Not Kyle Schwarber. We're going to go with
Altair.
Yeah. We're going to go with a guy who is one of the most polarizing Phillies ever because his numbers on Baseball Reference are eye-popping.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm going to let you finish.
Oh, wow.
Taylor.
She Kanye'd me.
Just to throw this out there, because we're doing of all time, but we're doing during their career with the Phillies.
Correct.
Looking at their, so it's anybody, and there's no time limit, just their best years with the Phillies for their specific position. And there are guys that have played multiple positions, but we're factoring in where we felt like their career was at its best.
Yes, and
continue, Taylor.
Bryce Harper is a weird one because we've known him now as a right fielder up until now, but he's going to be a first baseman going forward. So if we do this again in 8 years, we'll probably have Bryce in our top 3 Phillies first baseman of all time. Mm-hmm. But currently, we kind of went with right field for Bryce Harper. So number 3, kicking us off on the list, you could make the case that he deserves to be 1 or 2 based off of numbers alone. A lot of people that watched him play kind of hated his lackadaisical defense, and he wasn't a mud dog, and he wouldn't run into walls. He was one of those guys, Renee, I'm sure you've encountered these people in your playing careers, that just makes he almost looks, I don't want to say lazy, but it comes so easy to them that it's just like effortless. Yeah. And Bobby Abreu to me was like an overhated on person for some reason. His numbers are spectacular. And here's the graphics. 9 years with the Phillies, 2,400 career games. Jimmy Rollins is best man in his wedding. Bobby Baseball was tremendous.
Wow, what an idiot on that graphic. Who put 2 different numbers of home runs? What an idiot. Okay. So the 195 and the 288 obviously are 2 very different things.
Yes. What's the first one?
The 288 is his career. Okay. The 195 is how many he hit with the Phillies. Right.
So there's his slash line with the Phillies. 303, 416, and a 513. Just incredible numbers. 814 RBIs. He stole bases on top of it, and he hit 300 or better 6 times. A Gold Glove, which I know people kind of would give him shit for, that he didn't run into walls. He had a cannon for an arm. He could steal bases. He could hit for power. He could get on base. Bobby Abreu was an awesome player.
He was. And he was a guy as an all-star, as you talk about that Gold Glove, somebody that was one of the best deals that the Phillies were able to make in that trade in 97 to be able to bring in Bobby Abreu because he had so much that he added on both sides of the ball. And in his time with the Phillies, cemented himself as a right fielder that you have to include in this conversation. The numbers alone are great, but as you mentioned, it was the fact that he did make it effortless. He had in his best games at his peak the ability to really change the game. And so Bobby Abreu, the stuff that when you look back on what he's been able to accomplish, whether it was the 2005 home run derby or being a silver slugger, whatever it was, Bobby Abreu was fun to watch. He was absolutely just a great competitor, regardless of what you think. So I think solid number 3 as a Philly, Bobby Abreu.
Yeah, Tyler, I know you we're pushing for him to almost be higher.
I think I would, and I think the further you get away from Bobby Abreu's playing career, especially with his time with the Phillies, because if we're being honest, like he had a decent couple of years in New York, LA started to fall off, and then it was kind of over for him from there. The bulk of his career was with the Phillies. The further you get away from Bobby Abreu's tenure with the Phillies, the more I think you appreciate how good Bobby Abreu actually was. And John Foley, I think, put in our group chat, I think the response he had was criminally underrated.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Like we said, 6 times hitting over 300.
That's crazy.
He had 40 or more doubles 5 times.
348 total doubles.
I mean, this guy was really quite good, and I think there was that era of Phillies baseball. It was still like vet baseball. It was still like machismo, like bravado, tough guy fans.
Yeah.
And they didn't, like you said, they didn't
He
like
didn't fit at the time.
He didn't
Right.
like, and maybe it was a little bit of, it felt nonchalant because it was effortless. This guy was a really freaking good baseball player. And quite frankly, I didn't expect to want to say this, but I almost feel like I would want to move him up the list a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I think the next guy's MVP award puts him over it. But like Randy says, he was only allergic to the wall. That was the only knock against him. And there is something to be said for, look, I know in Philadelphia here we want effort and we want Aaron Rowan running into the wall and risking it all. There is something to be said for being smart with balls off the wall. And yeah, Bobby wouldn't dive into the wall, but he would try to play the angles pretty well. And he did have a cannon of an arm. So, he did have that 1 Gold Glove, but he's a career 60 WAR player. Bobby Abreu was number 3 on our list. But you could certainly make the case, and Mopar, good luck with the knee draining, sir.
Yes, good luck.
But Bobby Abreu is awesome. All right, now the number 2 guy, I think eclipses Bobby Abreu. It's a shorter time period. He's going to be playing a new position going forward. But I think what he's shown you in the postseason and winning an MVP award here, I think it's safe to say, even in 4 years, some of it missed with time in the field, we can put Bryce Harper as the second best right fielder of all time. And look, when you're doing this at the end of his career, if he played right field for the entirety of his contract, he'd probably easily be number 1. But it's been 5 years, 3.5 of which were in the field. He's got an MVP. He's awesome. He is the team. He's been an all-star. He's tremendous. He's one of the faces of baseball. Bryce Harper, number 2.
Yeah, I know people in the chat are mentioning Jason Worth, but looking at those stats again, Tyler, if you can just flash those up again. Bryce Harper stats from 2019 in his 5 years with the Phillies, 581 games. His numbers, 284, 395, 536 splits with 591 hits, 122 of those home runs, has had 144 doubles, 360 RBIs, 387 runs, 58 stolen bases, and of course that 2021 NL MVP, as well as being a 2-time All-Star. For Bryce Harper, it's hard because as we were talking about with even comparing Roy and Zach, he's still playing now, so we don't have the full picture. And we know he's obviously going to be a first baseman moving forward. But the way that Bryce Harper at right field really and how he's been with the team in the previous years, the last 5 seasons, that absolutely what he's accomplished and how he's helped this team getting to the World Series, getting, obviously last year was first baseman, so we don't count that as much with the NLCS run. But he has changed the tides of the Phillies. The playoff drought ends. Getting, being a top team in the league, that's Bryce Harper.
He might be the most significant signing in Phillies history.
Honestly, I think it's hard because he's still in the midst of his career. We know he's changing positions to be a first baseman,
we had to keep him in right field.
I don't know if you can keep him. Yeah, if
Tyler,
we're talking about the past.
Do you think Bryce Harper's a good baseball player?
Yeah, he's okay. He's all right. So here's the thing. I think the longevity at the position, because we're talking about at the position, keeps him from
That's the tough part.
moving up this list. And quite frankly, I probably would have put him at 2 behind Abreu. I would have gone Harper 2 and Abreu, or
I think
Harper
the MVP
3 and Abreu 2.
I think the impact of Bryce on the team
plus playoff success
is
certainly fair. I think the small sample size of the position. So like if you just strictly said to me, pick a player, Bryce Harper, Bobby Abreu, I'm picking Bryce Harper. If you said to me, pick a Phillies right fielder and use the entirety of the sample size in which they played the position, I'm going to take Bobby Abreu. But to put the 1 at 3 and the 1 at 2, I think you could, if you want to flip the coin and pick either one, that's totally fine. I think just the longevity for me outweighs, and yes, Harper wins the MVP. I think Abreu's top MVP finish was like 12 or 14 maybe. But regardless, it was 12, and it wasn't even with the Phillies. His top with the Phillies was 14. 2 really good baseball players. One, I think we value properly, and one we don't value enough.
Yeah,
I think the other part of this to keep in mind for you guys that are watching, and I know, Chris, you're mentioning, and I'm assuming you're talking about Bryce, hands down one of the top 10 players in team history. Bryce is one of the top top players to ever wear a Phillies jersey, but because he just moved to first base, as we're going through our depth chart, you can't put him as a top first baseman. You know, as hard as it is to talk about him as a top right fielder, you absolutely cannot have him as a top first baseman. He hasn't even played a full season
We
at
might
first
in
base.
8 years.
So, right, in 8 years, it's a different conversation. But right now, we cannot, and you can't put together a list with a depth chart of the all-time best Phillies and not have Bryce Harper on there. So without a doubt, he has to find his way into that depth chart. The 2 versus 3 is one of those things that, like you said, Tyler, there are so many reasons you can argue either side, but he definitely should be top 3. And I know Jason Worth again was mentioned. He's not
Jason
our
Worth
number 1.
probably number 4
Yeah.
on this list. If he had played a little longer here, I think he could have weaseled in here.
And as CMC said, him in the postseason, Jason Worth in the postseason.
I love Jason Worth. He was one of my favorite players of that era.
Yeah.
But number 1, we're going to go with a guy who's enshrined in Cooperstown. Give the old heads some love a little bit. He's a Hall of Famer. He's an MVP, several-time All-Star, won a Triple Crown, won a batting title, spent 15 years with the Phillies. There's his numbers, a career 320 hitter, 326 during his time with the Phillies, almost 1,000 RBIs, almost 1,000 runs scored, a little bit of stolen bases in there, doubles machine, won the MVP, and who could forget that season, 1932, a 4-time home run leader. Chuck Klein's enshrined in Cooperstown. I think we'd be a little remiss if we put either of those two above a Hall of Famer yet. I'll be honest here, guys. I didn't see Chuck Klein play. I'm not that old. I missed his playing days.
I remember like it was yesterday.
Yeah, I'm gonna put the Hall of Famer up there as the Phillies' all-time right fielder.
Listen,
but I think if Bryce plays his entire career in right field, I think Bryce eclipses him.
So at one point in 1929, Chuck Klein was one of the best NL hitters of that stretch. His first full season in 1929, he led the league with 43 home runs, and only one guy had more with 46 home runs to lead all of baseball. Who do you think Chuck Klein was behind in 1929?
Babe Ruth.
Babe Ruth. Like
I know that name.
Yeah, Chuck Klein was in, as you were reading through his accolades and all that he's accomplished and all that he's done. It's been almost 100 years, which is wild. We talk about 1929. It's literally 95 years ago. But looking at the stats, the records, the accolades, the MVPs, his slashes and batting average and home runs that he hit to finish with 300 home runs. Listen, yeah, Chuck Klein still takes that number 1 spot. But Dave is saying, everyone who saw Chuck Klein play, raise your hands.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just like you kind of got to give the old head his due there. I think if Chuck Klein's playing in today's modern era of baseball and he's seeing Senga ghost forkballs and Devin Williams and Orion Kerkerine sweepers.
What does my man do with Yohan Duran 100 with 12
like
inches of vertical break?
Yeah, Chuck Klein might be shitting himself in facing modern day baseball, but you have to judge the guys, unfortunately, by the era they were in.
That was a different game. We were even looking up before the show started. Like that was a time around the time of World War II, as you saw from Chuck's picture in black and white. Like you think about how much has changed, not even just baseball wise, but around the world since the 30s and the 40s
Bryce
of the
Harper
1900s.
Would go back to 1944 and hit 115 home runs.